Hello guys, and welcome back to another Crystal of Atlan video. Let's get into it. I want to talk a little bit about my first impressions of this game. So in case you didn't know, there's currently a technical beta test, or probably more considered a localization test, that's currently taking place for the Crystal of Atlan anime MMORPG action RPG that is coming sometime in 2024. Now, I've been playing this beta, kind of experimenting with it and getting first hands-on look at it, and I wanted to give you some of my first impressions and thoughts about the game, diving into it, somebody who isn't really familiar with what's gone on the CN side, because it has previously released there before. This is my own raw experience and my raw thoughts on it. I want to talk to you a little bit about those now, but before we do, make sure to drop a like and subscribe on the channel, guys, for future content. So before we jump into it, guys, I just want to remind you that this is going to be a first impressions of the game, just what I've gotten in the early parts. This is not a long-term end game analysis here, okay? All right, let's take a look. As I said before, this is an anime-styled MMO action RPG that is going to be releasing on both PC and mobile. So I know some of you out the gate might be like, oh, a mobile MMO. Look, I think it's going to surprise you based on my initial experience with it, but let's take a look at it. So this game, at least in the base version of it and on this technical beta test, there are 4 starting classes for it. You've got your classic swordsman, you got a gun-wielding musketeer, you have your magical spellcaster, which is the magister, and then you've got kind of like a summon-based character with the puppeteer. Each of these characters can then go on to specialize into one of 2 advanced classes within each of them. So kind of like grand total, if you're including the base classes, that's 12 classes that you can experience. Examples for the swordsman, which is the one I've got the most experience with so far, is the swordsman can either go on to become the Magiblade, having more of kind of a magic blend into their combat style, or to the berserker, which becomes more of a heavy-hitting, claymore-wielding character, kind of like Guts from Berserk. So of course, I had to pick that character. While this is an MMORPG, it is not completely open world, or not that NA MMO is like completely open world, but it's way more instant zone experience that I've encountered so far, as opposed to something like WoW, which is still instant zone, but like it's much bigger in terms of like size and scale. But if you're not looking for like some crazy open world exploration, I don't know, it didn't bother me that much. So that's kind of the general overview of the game. Let's go in and let's talk about some of the positives and some of the negatives. So jumping into the first positive, I gotta say, is the combat. The combat for this game is very fluid. I did my initial playthrough on the beta test for this on stream. Also, feel free to follow me for future streams on YouTube here at Connor's Thoughts, or also on Twitch at Connor's Thoughts. And throughout the process of on that stream, I could really feel myself becoming more and more in tune with the combat as it was unfolding. You know, they start you off with just a few skills, slowly roll in some new ones, and they really help you understand the synergy between the skills and comboing between each of them. It's done at a pretty good pace that you're not completely overwhelmed by your talents and skills, kind of like you may have experienced in some other MMOs. I think one of the benefits to do it being split as a mobile and PC MMO is some of it has been simplified, but in a way that, like, me as a casual MMO player, I guess you could say, not like a hardcore grinder that's like digging into all of the specific numbers every single point along the way, I liked it, and it seemed very straightforward, but a good variety in terms of skills, and it helped you find a way to figure out your own rotations of those skill sets. The animation in this game is fantastic. I would say that the models, the combat animations, the pre-scripted cinematics that have been coded into the game are all done really well and are of a very, very high quality. You can tell there was a decent amount of budget that was put behind this game. Like, this is me just looking in game here, and I can just tell you that the overall model quality, even on my PC, which I'm not going to say is a high-end, top-of-the-line PC, looks really good to me. Now, I will say some of the cosmetic customization is a little more limited, but also this is a technical beta test, and with this going to be a free-to-play MMO, I'm sure that's where they're going to be trying to make up some of their money, is on the cosmetic side. So I mean, yeah, there's something to be looking out for there. One of the other things that I really enjoyed throughout playing and progressing through the story and leveling my character was the mini bosses. There is a lot of mini bosses that are scattered throughout the levels that give you a little bit of extra difficulty. It's not a one-to-one comparison because it's not an MMO, but if I compare it to something like Genshin, that's kind of like an open world exploration, you almost get a little bit of MMO vibes from it. Some people might crucify me for that take. A lot of the enemies seem very similar and repackaged over and over and over again, and while there are some elite mobs, I find you don't get the same kind of experience. But that could just be because I've got like a very high leveled Genshin account and combat's just become pretty easy at this point. All I'll say is, at least in the early game for this, the elite monsters, when they came into the combat, always felt like a nice little spice and gave me something else to think about and consider when you're balancing clearing the mobs versus attacking the elite. I'll also say I do love the verticality of the combat. There's different parts where they've got enemies that are on elevated platforms or that they're currently on the main level, and you're kind of jumping back and forth between them, as well as AoE effects that are kind of spawning on the ground at the same time. There was a specific bridge combat that took place that was legitimately so much fun, balancing between clearing mobs, jumping to the higher levels, dodging those AoE, and I was really loving the combat at that point, at least in the early game. But now that we've talked about some of the positives, let's talk about a few of the negatives. The first thing that I want to draw attention to is the energy system. I hate the idea of there being an energy system in an MMO. Inherently, MMOs are games that you want to invest more time into to grind up and level your character to get to that end game content, and you don't want to have artificial barriers like energy being put in the way. I understand other MMOs have some time-gated mechanics. A perfect example is, only being able to run a raid boss once a week, so you can't just keep farming the same raid boss over and over again. And I understand there are some reasons and justifications for having artificial time-gated barriers being put into place. I just don't think energy systems are one of them, and I don't think they belong in an MMO like this. Fortunately, I'm leveling very quickly in the early game and as I was progressing, so I didn't encounter too many energy barriers, but that's something you can definitely tell as you get into the later stages. You're not leveling as much and you start burning through that energy a lot faster. It is going to become an issue and become something that's just going to stop you from playing. And so what that means is you're probably going to be running multiple characters. Now, fortunately, with having the 4 different classes that can all then specialize, 2 different times, there's a lot of variety in terms of gameplay that you can do. So if you do use all your energy on one character, you can switch to one of the other classes. But I just don't like that. I don't like the energy system in that. It feels like an artificial way to just gate a player from playing the game more. I just don't understand it. Let me clarify that. I understand it, I don't like it. The next thing that I am not a fan of is something you've probably experienced before if you've played other Korean MMOs, or if you've played Lost Ark in particular. The gear leveling system is very similar to that, where as you are trying to enhance gear, when you get the gear that you want, it is an RNG gear enhancement system, where as you are leveling the gear higher and higher, it decreases in percentage chance to level up a piece of gear. I hate that. I have never liked RNG enhancements on gear. I have a hard enough time with RNG rolls on gear, getting the substats that you need to add another layer of RNG on the enhancement side. It's just like a double shot to the gut that I just don't like. I've never liked Korean MMOs for things like that in particular. It was something that frustrated me to no end in Lost Ark. So I do think that kind of gear enhancement is going to be a barrier for me personally long term. It might not be a barrier for you, but for me, it is. The last thing that's kind of a drawback, in my opinion, is actually the story itself. I know that might sound funny because I was talking earlier about how like the animations are really good, the pre-scripted cinematics that they've put into the game, or pre-rendered, I should say, cinematics that they've added into the game are really well done. They're very well polished. They look great. I'm a fan. I didn't really care what was going on in the story though. I was trying really hard to be invested in the story early on. I was reading through the script and trying to follow along with it, but I found the more that it was progressing, the more it felt just like a little generic to me. It's not an isekai or anything like that, but just it felt very like generic fantasy storyline. And yeah, it just did not hook me whatsoever. So if you are a person who plays MMOs specifically for the main storyline, I don't think there's a lot of you, but like, there's wowheads out there, and Final Fantasy A Realm Reborn did a really good job on some of their later patches. So obviously some of you are out there. I just don't think this is going to be it. But also I'm in the early game, and maybe that's something that's going to turn a little bit later on. I'm open to it. We'll see. To kind of tail this off with some other final general thoughts, these aren't necessarily positive or negative. Something I thought was really interesting is that the leveling in the early game seemed really fast. Like, to get to your class specialization was very quick. Now that might just be it was accelerated in this technical beta test. They have tweaked certain things for this. They've removed the monetization. So it could be that it's actually going to take a little bit longer to get to your advanced class. But I would say that felt maybe like almost too quick. I know you want to get to like those advanced classes, but a little bit of extra time I think on the base class probably would have been okay. But just again to say, despite any of the negatives that I've said so far, my experience so far has been great. I haven't encountered any issues with the monetization because again, it's disabled. From an overall gameplay perspective, I started really loving the combat and it's been a, fantastic play so far. But I am concerned for the future in knowing that there does seem to be a lot of Lost Ark inspiration here. And I know Lost Ark's monetization, it, being free to play, but having a lot of those, paid benefits that you can get from it. I could see that being a big barrier or problem here in the later game, but that is fully just speculation. I don't know. I haven't, like I said, I haven't looked at what has actually gone on the CN side. This is me giving my own personal take on it. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Did you get into the technical beta test? Have you been enjoying it? Are you excited to play this game? Have you kind of lost interest already and you don't really care to give it another look? I'd be interested to know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. I greatly appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.